Hello, I'm Madam Eva, a biology teacher from Educare Tanzania, and I'm here, my dear student, to take you through a series of questions, of revision questions in our topics of Form 4. And today we'll make the continuation of our revision exercise number 2 in the proceedings questions, because the questions were too many and we decided to divide it into series of sessions so that you as a student will understand each question well. As you can see here, we'll continue with the question number 31. Also, we'll deal with the question number 32. So welcome, my dear student. I need your attention so that you will understand how to solve different questions of genetics. As you can see here, our question needs us to state why is it more efficient to perform a test cross with homozygous recessive than with homozygous dominant genotype. As you can see, my dear student, this question needs you to state why it is more important to make a test cross with a homozygous recessive than doing a test cross with homozygous recessive. And now I am very happy because you are going to understand the reason behind that crossing, which is test cross. As you can see here, first of all, you have to understand what does the term test cross mean. Lazima ujue the term test cross inamaanisha nini, and then you will be capable of giving out the reasons for why test cross always involve the use of homozygous recessive rather than the use of heterozygous recessive. And now, my dear students, as you can see, a test cross is a genetic cross performed to determine the genotype of an individual expressing a dominant phenotype. Test cross, you have to understand that is a cross which is always done to determine the genotype of an individual. Sometimes we call it a known genotype of an individual. We use test cross to search for a known genotype of an individual. And obviously, this unknown genotype of individual is the dominant one. And that's why, as you can see here, this is done by crossing the individual in question with an individual that is homozygous recessive for the traits being studied. As you can see this statement here, the test cross is done by crossing the individuals in question. When we say individuals in question, it means that you may be given a question need you to perform a test cross, but you suppose that the alleles or the genotype for the individual provided in the questions are there provided, but you will have to take that genotypes and cross with the recessive of that individual. For instance, if the trait is all about, let's say, the albinism or about the color blindness or any trait you might be given in your question, you will have to cross that trait with its homozygous recessive form, and then you will be capable of determining the unknown genotype of an individual. As you can see here, here are the reasons why performing a test cross with a homozygous recessive individual is more efficient than using a homozygous dominant individual. And now we are going to look on the reasons for why we have to perform the test cross with the homozygous recessive individuals rather than using the homozygous dominant individual. Now we are going to understand the reason behind the test cross. And now you can see, if the unknown genotype is homozygous dominant, all offspring will display the dominant phenotype, capital letter A. And if the unknown genotype is heterozygous, about half of the offspring will display the recessive phenotype, which is this one here. As you can see here, we are going to determine the unknown genotype of an individual, and if that unknown individual atakuwa ni we can say ni dominant, homozygous dominant, it means offspring wata display dominant phenotype. But if the unknown genotype in heterozygous, it means some of the offspring will display the heterozygous, we can call it the homozygous recessive. As you can see here, this clear phenotypic ratio allows an easy determination of the unknown genotype. So hivyo kwa urahisi huo kuweza kutambua kwamba the unknown is either homozygous dominant or heterozygous, itatusaidia kuweza kuexpress vizuri, kuweza kufanya crossing kwa njia rahisi zaidi. And then Now you can see if the unknown genotype is heterozygous, about half of the offspring will display the recessive phenotype, and this clear phenotypic ratio allows an easy determination of the unknown genotype. As you can see here, this is repeated. And now we are going to look on the second issue on homozygous dominant. The first point we talk about the homozygous dominant, if the unknown is homozygous dominant or heterozygous. And now we are going to look on the homozygous dominant as another reason. If the unknown genotype is crossed with another homozygous dominant individual, all offspring will also display the dominant phenotype, and in this case you wouldn't be able to determine if the original individual is homozygous or heterozygous, because there is no visible difference in the phenotypes of the offspring. Kwa sababu hapa tunakuja kuzungumzia homozygous dominant. Kama tukichukua homozygous dominant kama unknown genotype tukaicross with another homozygous dominant individual, tutapata traits za offspring ambazo zinajiexpress, tunasema phenotypically zinajiexpress ni dominant, na hapo haitaonyesha tofauti yoyote. As you can see here, it wouldn't be able to determine if the original individual was homozygous or heterozygous, kwa sababu tutaona kwamba offsprings wote watachukua karakta ya dominant trait, na hapo itafanya mtu kuwa difficult kutambua kwamba the original individuals walikuwa wana possess either a dominant ama heterozygous. Again, it's all about genetic truthfulness. We can see the homozygous recessive individual will always provide a genetic baseline to evaluate against, and when the offspring show a recessive phenotype, it confirms that the original individual must be heterozygous. So tunaenda kuangalia genetic truthfulness. Kwa nini tunafanya kucrossi kuweza kutambua ile unknown genotype kwenye test cross tunatumia homozygous recessive, ni kwa ajili ya genetic truthfulness. How genetic truthfulness itatusaidia sisi kuweza kutambua. Kwa mfano hapa tumechukua homozygous recessive, itaenda kutu providea at least tofauti. Even kama yule pale unknown ni dominant, itatusaidia kudisplay traits ambazo zitatusaidia kutambua unknown genotype ni ipi. But ukitumia homozygous dominant, it means kwamba sifa zitakazojitokeza zitakuwa masked by dominant traits na hautajua the trait of unknown individual. As you can see here, it confirms when the offspring show a recessive phenotype, it confirms that the original individual must be heterozygous. Conversely, if all offspring show the dominant phenotype, it confirms that the original individual is homozygous dominant. So tunatumia homozygous recessive for genetic truthfulness kwa ajili ya udhibiti, tunasema kuthibitisha ama kuprove in such a manner kwamba when the unknown genotype akiwa ni dominant bado itatuonyesha individual atakao result atakuwa ni heterozygous. Even when tukiangalia kama ni heterozygous, kuna individuals ambao watadisplay recessive traits. Kwa hiyo inakuwa ni rahisi kudetermine ile unknown genotype rather than the use of homozygous dominant. So ukitumia homozygous recessive inakuwa ni rahisi kwako kuweza kugundua ile unknown genotype of the individual. That's why in test cross we employ more the use of homozygous recessive rather than the use of homozygous dominant individuals. Also, we can conclude in summary by saying that using a homozygous recessive partner in a test cross clearly distinguishes between homozygous dominant and heterozygous allele based on the phenotype of the offspring, allowing for a straightforward interpretation of the genotype being tested. My dear student, you may use this little conclusion or this little summary for you to express in a little bit about the question, but I explain it more in details ili uweze kuelewa vizuri why there is the use of homozygous recessive rather than the use of homozygous dominant. Hapa ni kwa ajili ya kuprovide ile straightforward interpretation. kwa sababu ukitumia dominant itakupa ugumu kwenye kuinterpret the unknown genotype, but when you use the homozygous recessive, it will provide you with a straightforward interpretation of the genes or genotypes of the unknown individual, as you can see here. And now, after finishing with this question number 31, it's our time now to go and take a look on the question number 32. I hope umeelewa vizuri the reason for using homozygous recessive rather than the use of homozygous dominant when performing a test cross. And now, my dear student, remember these questions is from the book of Tanzania Institute of Education, TAI. At the last of each topic, at the end of each topic, there are revision questions, and here are the solutions for those questions. My dear student, ukiona hujaelewa about the topic of genetic vizuri, go back to our media, search the topics of your concern, then study it well, and you'll be back to the revision questions to broaden up your understanding. And now, let's take a look on the question number 32 in the revision exercise number 2. We can see one family were quarreling due to their baby girl being albino, while neither of the couple has albinism. The father of the child was blaming that mother was responsible for the child being albino. By using genetic diagrams that are well illustrated, show how each of the two parents are responsible for albinism of their daughter and not the mother, using capital letter A as the dominant gene. As you can see, my dear student, our question is like you see there. The question is all about the concept of albinism, and we can see the family is in complaint. Father is complaining the mother by having the child who is albino, and the father is saying that mother is responsible for the albinism of the child, meaning that mother has another man who is albino. And now you, as a biology student, you have to demonstrate to show that both parents, the father and the mother, were responsible for their child being albino. And now, my dear student, the question is very easy to perform. You will have to remember the knowledge of albinism. As we can see in your question, the capital letter A provided it to us as the dominant trait, and we always use it as a dominant trait, meaning that's normal skin color. But the small letter A mean albinism. And now you will be capable of showing this family that the father and the mother were responsible for their child being albino by showing them the cross diagram. Either you will use the Mendelian cross, or you will apply the Punnett square to show that both parents were responsible for the skin color of their baby. And now, as we can see here, to understand how both parents can contribute to an albino child without either parents having the trait themselves, we first need to establish how albinism is inherited genetically. Albinism is typically caused by mutation in genes responsible for production of melanin, and in this discussion we will consider it as a recessive trait. My dear student, as we can see in this family, the father's skin is black in melanin, the mother's skin is black in melanin, and they met and they get a baby who is albino. Now you will have to demonstrate that both parents were responsible for this child to have the color of albinism. It means you will have to remember the knowledge of heterozygous. That means the father is heterozygous of albinism and the mother is heterozygous of the albinism. In mating, the traits combined, those recessive traits combined together from mother and father, and finally the baby resulted was the albino. And this shows that maybe most of child were born, the first one, the second one, the third one were normal, but the final one akawa albino kwa sababu trait ilikuwa ni heterozygous kwa parents wote. So you will have to educate the family that the albinism trait so lazima iwe expressed phenotypical, but one might be a carrier for the albinism. And now you can see here, let's denote that A is normal pigmentation, dominant allele, and I mean capital letter A, and small letter A is albinism. You can call it recessive allele. And now we are going to look on the parental genotypes. As you remember in our most previous sessions, we learned about how to solve genetic equations. When you are required to show maybe the crossing, or maybe by using the Punnett square or the Mendelian crossing, you will have first to show letters which will stand for the certain trait. And those letters we will denote them as allele. After then, those allele will have to combine to create the parental genotypes for both parents before you enter in the crossing party, either using Punnett square or the Mendelian crossing. And now, my dear student, let's take a look. Tumeona kwamba the capital letter A will stand for the normal pigmentation color, but the small letter A will stand for the albinism. And now it means tumekubaliana kwamba both parents walikuwa ni heterozygous, so the father genotype will be capital letter A and small letter A, and the father genotype itakuwa ni capital letter A and small letter A, and then tutaenda kuangalia on crossing what will happen. As you can see here, the mother does not express albinism, so her genotype can be either this capital letter A homozygous dominant, no risk for having an albino child, but heterozygous a carrier of the albinism trait. And now we are going to use the heterozygous kwa sababu tunahitajika kuonyesha how this child alikuwa formed from the crossing or from the mating of these two parents. And then we can see the father also does not express albinism, so his genotype can similar be either capital letter A, homozygous dominant, no risk of having an albino child, or capital letter A and small letter A, heterozygous, a carrier of the albinism trait. For an albino child to be born, both parents must contribute a recessive allele, meaning that both parents must be the heterozygous. Heterozygous meaning that they are the carrier of the albinism trait. And now you can see the possible scenarios. We will have to illustrate the genetic diagrams for both scenarios, whether the mother is a carrier and the father is also a carrier. Scenario number 1, both parents are carriers, and we can see parental cross will be as follows, will be as we can see here. This is the father, this is the mother, and the resulting child, can say that 25% is the normal pigmentation, and we can see 50% is the carrier one, and the 25% is the albino. As you can see here, this possibility here, or this scenario, will show us that the father and the mother were both responsible for the baby to be the albino. Again, we can see offspring genotype ratio, 25% normal pigmentation, 50% were normal pigmentation but carrier, and 25% were albino. I already explained it to you on how to find this percentage. You will have to take your trait of interest, you will put over the total number of traits, then you will times 100%, you will get your percentage on that trait. As you can see here, in this case, there is 25% probability that the child will be albino, genotype AA, due to having inherited the recessive allele from both parents. That is all about scenario number 1. Now we are going to take a look on the scenario number 2, where one parent is a carrier, the other is homozygous dominant, and parental crossing will be as shown here. We can see hatuwezi kupata albino child hapa, kwa hiyo this scenario can never work. And also you can see offspring genotype ratio, 50% the normal pigmentation, also 50% normal pigmentation but carrier. And in this case, there is no chance of having an albino child, since all offspring will be either normal pigmentation, carrier, or homozygous dominant, as we can see there at our Punnett square. Also, my dear student, by conclusion, before we end up our session, by conclusion, you will say we will determine the genotypes of the parent, which will give rise to the offspring who is albino. So you will state that by the father by having the heterozygous trait, and mother by having the heterozygous trait for albinism, they will both contribute to the formation of the albino child, and then you'll be capable of solving the complainant and the family stated in the question. And up to here, my dear students, I would like to say thank you for following us, Educare Media Tanzania. Don't forget to subscribe, share, and like.